From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Let's start here today. A request, a suggestion on language, either in person or in written language on social media, etc. There are a couple of phrases and words I need you to eliminate, if you would. One is putting Mr. in front of someone's name to connote an extra level of respect. It doesn't work. It just sounds hacky and dumb. I saw one social poster. They like to post old clips from All in the Family for some reason. It was a sort of classic TV site. And they never called him Carroll O'Connor. They called him Mr. Carroll O'Connor, the great Mr. Carroll O'Connor in this scene. And then they show a highlighted scene. And it just sounds dumb. Stop putting Mr. in front of people's names if that's your intent. If you think it's adding an extra level of gravitas or respect, it's not. You just sound dumb and hacky. Okay? So stop using Mr. in that context. It's just advice. You can take it or leave it. The other one, very similar, is use of the word sir. When you call someone sir for the same reason, if you think you're adding some punch, well, sir, or even worse, good sir. Well, good sir. We all remember the Michael Scott character from The Office. That's what you sound like when you use sir. There are very limited contexts where you want to use the word sir. Sir Elton John, Sir Lancelot. Okay, if the Queen has dubbed them knighthood, the little ceremony with the sword on the shoulder thing. Okay, there's that. It used to be used a lot in business, where underlings would call the boss sir. I don't know if is that still a thing? You tell me. I haven't been in that kind of a setting, in that sort of a business office setting for a while. So I guess it used to be appropriate there. I don't think, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it is. Of course, sir is most commonly used in the military, and that's part of their protocol and their tradition. Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. You guys go ahead. But in everyday usage, if you're dropping in sir, or calling somebody sir or good sir, that is, to my ear, completely anachronistic and makes you sound like a doofus. Good sir? I implore you, sir. Just don't do it. Here's another one. Oh my God, there's nothing more basic than this. That guy's a class act. Oh, he's a class act. Someone you want to compliment, praise, someone who has class. Just drop that entirely, please. It's so gone. You know, it's the kind of thing, language comes and goes and it evolves, and language, sort of like fashion, will sometimes rotate back on itself. Something old will be new again. Something out of fashion will come into fashion. So I'm not going to predict the future, but I can tell you right now, as we speak, to use the phrase class act, it just completely reveals you as adult. Please don't use the word class act. It's so played. It's so outdated. And it's come to mean exactly the opposite of what you intend, at least as it reflects on you, the speaker. It might not reflect poorly on the person you're talking about. We all know what you're trying to say, and we get it. We get the meaning. Okay, we understand you admire this person, and they comport themselves appropriately in life, and they even maybe go above and beyond. So it's high praise, and we understand it. We still understand it. But where it's opposite is how it reflects on you. You just sound like a dope when you say class act. Or even, oh my gosh, classy. I don't mean to keep referencing Michael Scott, but there again, there was an episode where he was going on and on. They had this long thread of jokes about his usage of the word classy. If you're using the word classy or class act, I don't think you have any idea of how you sound to people. Now, here's the problem. We all have circles of friends and family. We all have our bubbles. Your particular bubble may think class act is a perfectly acceptable phrase, and you use it all the time. And so the people in your bubble, they hear what you want them to hear, and they take it the right way, and they think you're a class act for using the phrase class act. So if it's working for you in your bubble, okay, I guess there's no problem. I'm just here to tell you from someone in a different bubble that if we catch that, if that's within our earshot, we think less of you. It's really dumb. It's played, it's old, it's hacky. And I got one more, and that's my friend. Well, my friend. Great to hear from you, my friend. You're a class act, my friend. There again, it's affected is what it is. It's overly ambitious in your endeavor to sound classy, to bring that one back. My friend is just, again, it's played, it's kind of over the top, and so many people use it. Talk about bubbles. This isn't a much larger bubble. A lot of people, many people who I like and admire, people in my own circle, use my friend. Now, I don't know if this is just my ear that's twinging when I hear this. I don't know. Maybe I don't share this one with others. This may be the case. I think the others, Mr., Sir, classy, I think others may share my opinion. But on this one, I'm not certain. It might be just me that I bristle when I hear someone use the phrase my friend. Many people use it sincerely, and it's often, and I would say equally used, and maybe even more oftenly used. Is that a phrase? It's used more often in a sarcastic, derogatory way. Like if you're in a fight with somebody, you're not going to get away with that, my friend. And then is that supposed to sound menacing or threatening? Or as though, I don't know, you're somehow above them socially, linguistically, physically? I don't get it. My friend just hits my ear like a brick. I notice it every time, and I cringe every time. So those, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 words and phrases. Mr., Sir, class act or classy, and my friend. All right. So some just important information I needed to share with you. I saw a recent essay commentary about white supremacy that I found interesting. I think it was CNN. Yeah, I'll give the guy credit. John Blake of CNN. Kind of looking at the future of white supremacy and points out something kind of interesting that I hadn't considered. Now, I'm very concerned about white supremacy. We talk about it a lot here. It's a scourge. It's a problem. It, even though people hate to hear this, it defines our nation from its founding. We were literally founded on white supremacy. And it's embedded into pretty much every institution. And it's a tough nut to crack. But the optimism, especially recently, about purging white supremacy is that it might just die a natural death through demographics. We saw in the latest census reports, of course, census every 10 years. It's always a big deal. And afterwards, for months and even years, researchers dig into those census numbers to give us a clearer picture of where we stand. Well, the bombshell headline was, and we've known it for a while, so-called white people, and I use the phrase so-called, maybe we'll get into that in a second, why I do that. So-called white people will, at some point, very soon, we've been hearing this for many years, be in the minority. Black folks and people of color will be the majority in the country. No one of them will be the largest group. Whites will always be always. They will still be the largest group for quite some time. I don't know if there's any projection out into the future when whites are no longer the largest group. But overall, they will be outnumbered by black folks and people of color. Okay. So the latest census numbers tell us that's happening even more quickly than we had planned, and it's just a matter of a few years, and that's going to happen. And some people took heart in that and said, well, white supremacy is just going to go away through the natural forces of changing demographics. That is an optimistic thought. And I myself maybe have bought into that and shared that optimism. But as the writer, the analyst here, John Blake, points out, the concept of whiteness, which is something that I think we need to be more clear about. The concept of whiteness, the writer points out, has been malleable over the years. And this is very simple to understand. He points out pretty obvious examples, especially Irish and Italian. When the Irish immigrants first came in big numbers, there was a lot of bigotry against them, and they weren't considered, quote unquote, white. Irish need not apply, that whole, we remember those signs from our history books. The other obvious example is Italians. Bigotry against Italians, a lot of racial slurs that I won't repeat. Stereotypes, some that still hold on to today. But as respect to their whiteness, they weren't white when they first immigrated. It was over time that they were assimilated and folded in, the Irish, Italians, you could name others. So it's safe to assume that process will continue, what is or is not considered white. And as different racial groups and ethnicities migrate to the United States and assimilate into the mainstream culture, you can certainly see, especially through marriage and children, a kid might have an Asian mom and a black dad, or a white dad and a Hispanic mom. I mean, there are all sorts of combinations. And over time, it's just this melting pot that some people just think is the greatest thing in the world. There's another debate. Are we a melting pot or a salad bowl? We should talk about that sometime. But as it regards whiteness, some will be folded in to the white club, others will not. And as the author points out, one of the great candidates here are Latinx folks. Because as we know, when we're just strictly talking skin color here, there's a variety. All colors of the rainbow come out of the Latinx community. So the white supremacists of this country, of which there are many, I think will gladly accept so-called white Latinx folks as long as they assimilate to their taste and to their opinions. So it's kind of a bit of a pessimistic analysis. I guess you could take it that way. It's also just a bit of a warning. Don't get too comfortable in this idea that demographics are going to contribute to the natural death of white supremacy. White supremacy has flourished throughout our history because it's been able to adapt. It's been able to accept others into their fold. They've been able to broaden the definition of whiteness. And we should spend a little time on that. I've said before, let me repeat now, we should probably even stop using the term. Because white, as it regards to ethnicity, is a fiction. And this is not my original thought. I've read several articles, essays on this, and hadn't really thought about it this way until a few years ago. But there's been some good literature on the concept of whiteness. And it only exists in opposition to people of color. It doesn't really exist on its own terms, as an entity in and of itself. It's It's almost by definition white supremacist because it's anti-black folks and people of color. It's defining oneself as not someone else. I'm different than you. If, on the other hand, European immigrants had maintained their own heritage, and again, it's just going back to this article, it's just a matter of time to answer this question, but my question is, will Latinx folks and Asian folks and name any number of people, we now have refugees from all around the world, including Afghanistan, how quickly will they assimilate and, in doing so, abandon their own history? Because let's face it, that's what most European Americans have done. Sure, the DNA tracking or, whatever these, what are they called? The 23andMe or the heritage sites or whatever they are, you can find your background. I think that's, that's fine. That's good. It's nice to have a little awareness of where you're from. But I don't know. What's your personal experience? I'll use my own example. My grandparents immigrated as children with their parents. So they were just very young when they came to America from Ireland and Scotland and Sweden. Those are the three countries that my people hail from. Now, they grew up in America. They assimilated. My grandmother had a Swedish accent, I recall, when I was very young. But by the time the years passed through my parents and then on to me, and then we come to today, I have really, literally no affiliation, even understanding, any knowledge at all about my heritage. I don't know anything about Sweden, its history. I know absolutely nothing about Ireland and Scotland. I don't have any connection at all. Certainly no visceral connection. I don't feel any sort of pride when I hear that an Irish team won in the Olympics, or I think at the most I can say there is a little bit of a longing to understand, to feel connected, but I don't. I think if I went there, I've never been to Europe. I'm going to go to Europe one of these days. I'm going to scrape together enough money and screw the savings, screw my retirement. I'm going to just spend it all and go to Europe, I think, someday. I want to visit Ireland and Scotland and Sweden. And I think when I do, I think I'll feel it. That's a guess. It's a guess on my part. I think I'll feel the connection. I think I'll tear up and never want to leave. That's my prediction. But the point I'm making, and maybe you share this, I don't know, do you have any connection at all to your heritage if you are a European American? Now that would be an identity. If I could really think of myself as an Irish American or a Swedish American, that would be an identity that no one could criticize. There's no natural thoughts of superiority inherent to that idea. Right here in Milwaukee, we have, we used to call them ethnic festivals. I think the more appropriate term now is heritage festivals. When I was a kid, they were called ethnic festivals. And there are several every summer. There's Irish Fest, and there's German Fest, and Polish Fest. And of course, there's festivals for African Americans, for Hispanics, for Asians. And then there are others not based on ethnicity, but there's Pride Fest, there's Labor Fest, celebrating workers. Everybody's got a festival. So I think that's great. It's fantastic. I can't find personally any negative connotations to that. And it's nothing but positive. It's celebrating heritage. And of course, everything that goes along with that, the culture, the food, the music. Now, if we could all sort of embrace that idea of diversity, and then we really can celebrate our own heritage, not just at a summer festival, but every day of the year. And maybe we can reinvigorate some understanding, not only understanding, but some real connection to where we come from. See, there's nothing at all. That's nothing but good. That's nothing but good. But to get back to my original point here, what this all comes around to, when you use the word white, All of that is tossed out the window. White is, by definition, just by the very use of the word, divisive, negative, troublesome, and in its very concept, at its very core, denotes superiority, whether you think so or not. Whether you're conscious of that or not, it absolutely does. Because whatever you think of your own heart, I'm a good person. I don't have a biased bone in my body. I'm the least racist person you know. We've all heard that stuff. I don't care what you believe or even what you feel. It doesn't change the fact that this nation was founded on white supremacy. And not just that, but on the absolute the cruelest traditions of slavery and subjugation, of invasion and tyranny and torture, of genocide. These aren't political opinions. These are historical facts. Now, I suppose you could have, I'm trying to be generous here. I suppose you could have some room for argument regarding the progress of America from 1619 and forward. And sure, yeah, there are arguments to be made, and there are accomplishments to be lauded, and there is progress to be celebrated. So that's where we can get into a little bit of a debate. So that's more than we're going to start to chew on right now. But what I'm talking about is the term white and whiteness. It can only be defined in opposition to what it's not. And so then it's not a useful term. At best. At best, it's not useful. And it is divisive. And at worst, it linguistically and subconsciously upholds and maintains and perpetuates the very notion of white supremacy. So analyst John Blake, I think, is right to point out this warning. A multiracial America, while many of us, most of us, are very happy about that, we can't just rely on it to make things all better. He points out, as we've discussed here, that whiteness, he calls it elastic. White supremacy isn't just more resilient than many assume, he writes. It's also elastic. Consider how whiteness has been defined. It's a prime example of how white supremacy adapts. Oh, here's the date I was looking for. The census suggests that white Americans will be a minority by 2045. 2045. But as several commentators have already noted, this date can easily be postponed. Whiteness isn't a fixed identity. It's like taffy. It expands to accommodate new members if they have the right look. And as we've discussed, he goes on to talk about how Latinos are going to play a great part in this because of the... And it's almost embarrassing to talk about this, but we're literally talking about skin tone. It's hard to even talk about this. He also points out something that I've only learned in recent years. I guess I never quite understood the racism to be found within the Latinx community. I've only learned about that in the last little bit. I guess maybe I'd see a headline here or there over the years, but I never really considered how it's an issue within the Latinx community that they struggle with. And it could very well, and according to this writer, may very well enter into the larger picture of a white supremacist nation, which the United States is. And I know that sounds very controversial to some people, but for me, and I don't know about you, but for me, it's just a fact. It's really nothing to be debated. The only debate is to how we get beyond the white supremacy on which we were founded. So the writer's solution, what real racial progress would look like. Here's the hard truth we must face about the future. We may live someday in an America where there are no racial majorities, but whiteness can still reign supreme. Nothing will change, though, unless we go after the racial hierarchy that makes whiteness such an exclusive club. That requires radical change. It would involve uprooting systemic racism embedded in our public schools, neighborhoods, and justice systems. It would involve a more equitable sharing of power and resources, not out of white guilt or compulsion, but out of the knowledge that we all do better when we all do better. It will ultimately require that we discard the modern notion of race, the biological fiction that there is something called a black person or a white person or an Asian person. The modern concept of race has been used too long to enslave and exploit. Okay, now, here's where I have some troubles. I completely agree with that, of course. But too many racists and white supremacists use that exact argument against us. Well, we're all the same. And they wrap it up in this kind of happy talk. And they love to quote Martin Luther King, the racists. Oh my God, the racists, the white supremacists. They love to quote Martin Luther King from the I Have a Dream speech about the whole content of character. It's not the color of your skin, it's the content of your character. So they use this to claim that there's not a problem, right? It's the racist who says, I'm the least racist person. It's the argument that says, well, just us being concerned about racial equity, that we're the problem. We're actually causing the problem, that we're the ones dividing everybody, those of us who advocate for racial justice. So that's a really dangerous, it's a right idea. Yeah, of course, it is a biological fiction that one person is black and one person is white and one person is Asian. But it's also, it's not a fiction when it comes to all the social components. It's a very real part of our history and of our social order. So you can't ever conflate the two. It's very dangerous. So be careful when you use that kind of language. Yes, race is a biological fiction, but it is a social and historical fact. So we have to understand both things at once. Both things are true. Let's give this guy the last word. The U.S. may indeed become a majority-minority country around 2045. We may become a rainbow nation of varying racial identities, skin tones, and interracial unions. But if we don't dismantle the racial hierarchy that gives status and power to whiteness, this new version of America won't really be new. John Blake of CNN. A nice piece, and I agree largely with it. All right, there it is. That's the log for today. This episode and every episode is available on your favorite podcast platform. When you go there, put Charles Bursell into the search window. That's how you find us. Better yet, go to the website, charlesbursell.com. Everything is there, all the podcasts, all the titles, right there, easy. Please follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Love to hear from you. Speaking of social media, please share this episode and other episodes. That's how we really succeed in distributing the show, is when you share. So please do that. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio, riverwestradio.com, and to Peter Donalds, who wrote and performed our theme song. Okay, go fight the good fight. I love you. I'm Charles Bursell.